Hello everybody, how you doing? It's lovely to be back. We are in the middle of a glorious heat wave here in Norwich in the United Kingdom. It's going to hit 40 degrees today. I don't know what that is in American money. Something like 11 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit, because everyone knows Fahrenheit isn't a real thing anyway. But 40 degrees centigrade, it's lovely. Not very Halloweeny though, which is a shame because today we're going to finish the last few chapters of Harry Hardman versus Halloween, which is a book I wrote because I love Halloween. And Halloween is my favourite time of year. And I wrote this as a love letter really to Halloween. The story follows 11-year-old Harry Hardman, who loves Halloween as much as I do. And he made this amazing costume for his Halloween to go trick-or-treating in. Dr. Slasher von Zompire Wolf and Roboterstein. This incredible costume, which his dog sadly ate before he was supposed to go. So he ended up going to a Halloween party at the bully's house dressed as a fairy princess. It was the only costume he could find at short notice. And before he went, he made a wish saying, please let this be the most exciting Halloween ever. And then he went off to the party. And then when he was there, the strange fog filled the town and everyone started to turn into whatever they were dressed up as. And he basically started to get chased through the town by all these monsters. And as he was going, he realised that something was calling to him. Something was making this happen, and it had something to do with him. So now we are about to find out why Halloween turned against Harry Hardman. Like I said, this is a book that hasn't been published yet, but it's so it still will have a few tweaks. I'm just going to read it off the screen behind me, which is why occasionally I will look as if I'm looking into the far distance. They've ended up, Harry, his sister Darlene, his best friend Buster, have ended up, and their dog Dizzy, have ended up in the coal mines beneath the town where Harry lives, which is where they've kind of been called to. Basically, Harry's little sister Arlene was kidnapped by pirates who used to be the police, and they've brought them into the coal mines, and they've managed to escape by going through a tunnel which they thought led outside, but actually it leads somewhere far worse. So this chapter is called Knock Knock, and it goes a little something like this. They were standing in another cave, where the first had been carved from the coalface, its walls as black as night. This one was made from stars and sunlight. Except it wasn't sunlight. How could it have been? Harry thought, kicking himself for being so stupid. It was the middle of the night outside. No, this vast cavern looked as if it had been forged from diamonds, every wall studded with jewels that sparkled and shone. The light they gave off was dizzying, and Harry had to hold up a hand to shield himself from it. Through his fingers, he could see the same swirling, lightning-flecked fog. It hung beneath the ceiling, flowing towards the middle of the room, where it spiralled to the floor like an upside-down tornado. "What is this place?" asked Darlene, testing the glowing ground with a spider foot. "It's beautiful," said Arlene. "It's dangerous," said Harry, and he didn't really know why he'd said it. It was something about the fog, the way the tendrils of it dropped towards them, probing them like giant ghost fingers. Whatever had happened in the town tonight, it had started here, he was sure of it. He could feel the power in the room, chiming from the crystal walls, tickling his skin and making... Just eating a tea cake, and I've got a crumb in my mouth. And tickling his skin and making his rainbow hair stand on end. "What do we do?" he asked. "I don't know," whispered Buster, leaning on the wall. On the other side of the tunnel they just crawled through, Harry could hear snarls and shouts and screams. It wouldn't take Mike and his monsters long to find a way into this cave. Whatever Harry needed to do here, he needed to do it fast. "What did your friends say again?" Harry said, looking at Arlene. So Arlene is dressed as a medium, and she had a conversation with real ghosts who told them that they had to come to the mines. Arlene had one hand hooked in his pocket, and even though her little face still wore a resilient smile, he could feel the fear coming off her in waves. The ghosts. "They said there was somebody here you needed to find," she said, looking around. "Maybe he's shy." Or maybe he was just watching, Harry thought. He opened his mouth to call out, but the air wouldn't leave his lungs, trapped there by terror. In the middle of the room, the column of falling fog swirled and spun, bolts of lightning passing through it in every direction. Harry took a deep breath, tried again. "Hello?" His voice was a whisper, sucked up by the thunder of the fog and by the cacophony from the cave next door. "Dude," said Buster, leaning in. "Rule 16. The bad guy never reveals himself when you want him to, only when you least expect it." "Oh yeah," said Harry. He pushed himself off the wall, taking a step into the cave. The air here felt too thick, pressing against his face like a sweaty hand. He steeled himself, calling out as loud as he could, "Oh well, there's obviously nobody here, we're definitely safe and everyone is fine, everything is fine, let's just go home." He glanced at Buster, who gave him a cheerful thumbs up for the second or two until his thumb dropped off. A deep, almost subsonic rumble shook the cave, the wall of fog blowing out to reveal a core of golden light. It was so bright that Harry could barely look at it, but it was obviously human-shaped, and it was walking across the cave floor on 2 long legs. Arlene thrust her hand into Harry's, and he held it as tightly as he could, gripping his magic wand in the other. It wasn't much as far as weapons went, but there was still some juice in it. "Harry Hardman." The voice was made of thunder, of moving continents, powerful enough to make Harry's skull tremble. The figure was still walking, pulling a cloak of fog behind it. Its brightness was fading, revealing a slim body wrapped in some kind of old-fashioned tunic, and a thin, crinkly ancient face with rosy cheeks and a swollen nose. Only the eyes still blazed, as if there was an inferno burning inside the creature's skull. It stopped 20 yards away, and beneath the brilliance of its glare, its mouth curled into a smile. There was something almost clown-like about it, and it made Harry's whole body shudder. "At last, we meet." Harry's mouth flapped like a goldfish, his head an empty bowl. "At last?" squeaked Buster. "What does it mean? It's only been like 3 hours." "Oh, but I've known you for far longer, Harry." The figure laughed, a noise that made the walls shake, that rained pieces of crystal down on the ground. It held out its hands, fog curling around its fingers like miniature storms, lightning crackling to the floor. "How?" Harry asked. "Who are you? None of this makes any sense." He felt a storm of his own growing inside him, flashes of rage bursting in his vision like fireworks, and the deep growl of thunder in his belly. He let go of Arlene and took a step towards the creature, one fist bunched, the other clutching the magic wand. "What do you want with us?" he demanded. The figure laughed again, even louder than before. "What do I want?" it said. "I want nothing, Harry. I am just a spirit. I am the heart of this mountain. I have lain here quietly for millennia, and will do so for millennia more." "A what?" said Darlene. "A spirit? How is that possible?" "Your tiny minds cannot comprehend what we truly are," it said. "Some of your kind call us bluecaps, others call us brownies, bucka, strangers, knockers. The ones who came to carve out my coal, they would leave me gifts because they knew of my power." "Tommy knockers," said Harry, turning to the others. "I remember Dad talking about them. He always said they should make a horror movie about them." He'd heard stories all the time when he was a kid. Tales of the ghosts of the mines, the spirits or sprites or fairies who lived inside the earth. Mostly they were mischievous but harmless, stealing tools, leading miners into the tunnels and making them lose their way. But other legends spoke of their hunger for blood, for death, and they would knock out the props that held up the walls to cause cave-ins, or seal up the lift shafts to suffocate all who remained inside. Excuse me. But they were just stories. Nobody believed them, not even the most superstitious miner. Right? "Do you not believe?" the Tommyknocker said, plucking the thoughts from Harry's mind. "Even now?" Harry shook his head, but only because he couldn't find the words. It was impossible not to believe. Impossible not to believe. Even after everything that he had seen, even after all that had happened tonight, this was different. The creature in front of him radiated power like an electricity substation. He knew that it could turn him inside out with just a thought if it wanted. So why hadn't it? "I don't get it," said Harry. "I don't get any of this. Why you want me? Why all this is happening? I just don't understand why you do this to us, to the town." The Tommyknocker tilted its head, that crooked, clown-like smile still carving its face in two. Its eyes burned, gouts of energy flaring out of them. "Why, I would do this," it said, and there seemed to be genuine confusion in its voice. "No, Harry, this was not me." It took a step towards Harry, pulling the storm behind it. "Everything that has happened tonight is because of you, Harry. You're the one who brought Halloween to life." It extended a long finger and pointed it right at Harry, its voice hammering into his head. "You are the one who has doomed the town to death. Death, 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 death." The next chapter is called Like Father, Like Son. "What?" Harry shook his head, refusing to believe what he was hearing. He looked at Darlene, and she stared back with 8 sad eyes. Arlene clung onto the back of his pants, scowling at the creature that stood before them. Its grin seemed to stretch off the sides of its face, big enough to swallow Harry whole. "Careful," said Buster. "Never forget the first rule. Never trust a clown." "But how?" Harry said. "Or the second rule," Buster went on. "Never trust a clown." Harry's head was as dark and as impenetrable as the swirling column of fog. There was nothing in there but fear. I'm just me, just Harry. This can't be my fault. I can't do anything." "Oh, Harry," said the Tommyknocker. Its body shimmered, vanishing for a moment before burning back into reality. A fork of lightning cracked out of it, as loud as a pistol shot, thumping into the ceiling. "You underestimate yourself. Do you really not see?" Harry shook his head, his rainbow hair rising into the static air. The pressure in the cave was making his head hurt. It felt like all somebody had to do was light a match, and the whole mine would explode. The Tommyknocker took another step towards him, just a dozen yards away. This close, Harry could see beads of silver energy writhing over its ancient, leathery skin, like neon worms. "Let me tell you a story," it said. "A story about a man without fear. He shared your name, Harry." "You mean Dad?" Harry said. Darlene had moved to his side, her reassuring weight pressing against his leg. "Miners are courageous people," the Tommyknocker went on, "but Harry Hardman was the bravest man I have ever seen. Twice he risked his own life to save the souls of his fellow men. The first time he succeeded. The second, he did not. The day I knocked down the shaft, he pulled 2 men free, and he was going back for the next when he met his fate beneath the rock." It was as if something cold and bright had exploded in the middle of Harry's head. For a moment he couldn't see anything at all. Then, piece by piece, the cave came back into view. "You did it," Harry said. "You killed him." "He was killing me," the Tommyknocker said, its smile wilting. "They all were, piece by piece, hollowing me out. I needed my strength back, so I took theirs. And for that, I truly am sorry. I would have let him live, you know. He did not deserve his end." "But you didn't," said Arlene from behind Harry's back. "You took my daddy. I hate you." Harry held her with one hand, jabbing his broken wand at the spirit. The Tommyknocker glitched again, like a bad video game pixel, before flickering back into view. "But that was 6 years ago," Harry said. "What does it have to do with me?" The Tommyknocker laughed. "I am old, Harry. I am so very old. I have seen magic come and go in these lands and in others. But do you know what kind of magic still remains? Do you know what kind of magic still carries the power of the universe? Do you know what kind of magic you weaved tonight?" "Ah, the fruit punch," said Buster. "At the party. I knew it." Harry thought back. Back past the mines, back past the fights and the chases and the party, back to his house, to the moment he put on his new costume, his wig, his wings, and finally, in the shed, his dad's boots. "Please, Dad. Please let this be a good night. Please let this be the most exciting Halloween ever, the scariest Halloween ever. Please, I wish it. I wish it with all my heart." A wish, said Harry. My wish.
Not just any wish, said the Tommyknocker, but a wish from the heart, a wish forged from love, and a wish made in honour of a fearless man, your father.
A wish, said Buster. That's what I was going to say. He frowned. But wait, what did you wish for? For it to be the best Halloween ever, Harry said. But this wasn't my wish. I didn't want to change into a fairy princess. I didn't want the whole town to lose themselves. My mum, my sisters, my friends. I didn't want them to turn into monsters, and I didn't want to nearly die being chased here. This isn't right. This isn't what I wished for. You cheated. That's the rest of Rule 15, Buster said. If you meet a genie, be careful what you wish for. Actually, if you make any wish at all, be careful, because it will backfire. In fact, just don't wish anything. No wishes, period. Come on, dude. You know this. I didn't think it was going to come true, said Harry, and it didn't. It hasn't. This is something else. The Tommyknocker tilted back its head, another blinding shard of light cracking out of it, hitting the wall with a shower of sparks. When it looked back at Harry, the fire in its eyes was burning a little less brightly.
I am like you mortals, it said. I must sustain myself. Before, I would take my sacrifices from the men and women who worked here, just 1 or 2 every dozen years or so, but now this mountain lies empty. Nobody comes here any more, and I am hungry. I am so hungry.
It was just a trick, said Darlene, just a stupid ploy to get us all into the mine. The Tommyknocker shrugged its gangly arms.
We all have to eat, it said. Even mountains can die. I granted your wish. Now you must pay.
It swept its arms together, chanting something beneath its breath. The fog was collecting at its fingers, darkening, flashes of light fighting inside. Harry felt a wind blow past him, strong enough to pull his hair over his face. A peal of thunder ripped through the cave, loud enough to beat Harry's chest like a drum. What are you doing? He said, retreating into the wall. The hole was still there. They could still get through it, but the sounds of hell still poured in from the other cave. The Tommyknocker had a storm between its hands now, a towering cumulonimbus that was growing fast. The wind was picking up, dragging Harry along the ground for a moment before he managed to dig his heels into the rock. Dizzy whined, scrabbling as he was pulled towards the Tommyknocker's storm. Wait, Harry shouted. Stop! The Tommyknocker ignored him, still chanting. The cave was shaking hard, pieces of glittering rock smashing to the ground and releasing a hail of shrapnel. It's going to kill us, Buster wailed. It was, Harry knew. It was going to suck them into the storm or bring the roof down on their heads. I don't want to be eaten, screamed Arlene. She was holding onto his pocket, but Harry could feel her being torn away. He dropped his wand so that he could grab her, watching it spin across the cavern into the heart of the storm. Please, Harry yelled. He racked his brains, trying to think of a way out, trying to think of anything. But he wasn't clever enough. He wasn't brave enough. He wasn't brave enough. Stop, Harry called out, his words swallowed whole by the wind. Just wait. You said you'd let me. You said you'd have let my dad live. You said he didn't deserve to die because he was brave.
I did,
the Tommyknocker boomed, its voice filling every corner of the cave. Well, I'm brave too, Harry lied. I deserve to live. We all do. You have to give me a chance. The Tommyknocker lifted its arms and the storm rose up towards the ceiling, still expanding. Bolts of lightning crunched into the walls, the ceiling, the floor, each one leaving its mark on Harry's retinas until he could see nothing but light. He fought through the fear, the panic, trying to hang on to his thoughts before they were torn away. Let me prove it, he screamed. Let me prove that I'm as fearless as my dad. A deep, rumbling laughter filled the cave, and for a moment Harry thought the Tommyknocker had peered inside his head and seen the truth.
Only a brave soul would make such a request, it said. A brave soul or a fool. You have one chance, Harry Hardman, one chance to show me how brave you truly are. And for a moment a flicker of hope burned in Harry's heart until the Tommyknocker smiled once again. Fight the ones who chased you here, it said. Go forth and defeat the monsters of Halloween.
Harry choked. Which ones?
All of them. If you do that, if you capture their souls, I will spare you and the others here before me. If you do not, I will take you four and the hairy one and feast on you for the next 1,000 years. Either way, I will be sated this night.
The hairy one's the dog, right? Buster muttered. The Tommyknocker lifted its two long arms, and a gust of wind snatched Dizzy from the ground. The dog barked furiously as he was sucked into the cloud. "Wait, that's not fair," Harry shouted, the wind tearing the tears from his eyes. "Dizzy!"
"I will hold them here unharmed," came that awful voice, "for 500 heartbeats, no more. Then they are mine, and so are you."
Arlene grabbed Harry's hand as the current of air caught her, her legs flying up. Harry held on to her for as long as he could, but his palms were too sweaty. "You are brave, Harry," she said. Then she was gone, cartwheeling across the cave into the storm-drenched fog. "Arlene!" Harry cried. He looked at Buster. His best friend didn't stand a chance, his body threatening to fall apart as the wind took hold of him. He skittered along the ground on his one leg, waiting until he was close enough to Harry before reaching out. Harry took his hand while Darlene fired out a strand of web, rooting him in place. "I can't do this," Harry said. The Tommyknocker was chanting more loudly now, the howl of the wind drowning out its call. "I'm not brave. I'm like the least brave person I know." "That's not true," Buster said, fighting the current. "Harry, you're the only person I know who could get up and read a story in class, like a story about a gross monster with a swinging eyeball. You're the only person I know who would—" He yelped as his other leg came off, spinning into the storm. "Who would be so scared of change, so scared of everything, but who would still come to Mike Carey's party, and dressed as a fairy princess. You are brave, Harry. You made it this far. You can—" He let go, launched into the air like a rocket. "Rule 7, he shouted as he went. "A sidekick's death must always be avenged in the sequel." Then he was gone, the storm filling the entire top half of the cave. Darlene was only just managing to stay put, even with her spider powers. She turned to Harry, grunting with the effort of holding on. Harry grabbed her front legs, feeling the strength of the wind, knowing he was going to lose her too. "I can't," Harry said again. "It's impossible. I'm not Dad. I never was. I never will be." And amazingly, Darlene smiled. "You're not Dad," she said. "I'm glad you're not. You don't remember. You're too young. But he wasn't this perfect, fearless hero. He wasn't anything close to that. He was a great dad to us, but he could be a bully too. He was always fighting, always drinking. He was Harry Hardman by name and by nature, sure. But his kind of hardness, it wasn't always good. It wasn't always real. And this picture you have of him, Harry, it's a dream. It's a story you've told yourself." "No," Harry said, shaking his head. He was Dad," said Darlene, her back four legs coming off the ground. "I loved him. We all did. You most of all, because you were so young. And I see him in you. I see him in you every single day. I see that hardness, that courage, but it's different. I don't know how to say it. He was strong in body, but you're strong in heart. Dad was the pick that shatters the coal, but you're the fire that burns it. Do you hear me, Harry? Yours is the kind of courage that lasts 1,000 years." "But I'm just a fairy princess," he said. "You're not just a fairy princess," she replied. "You're Harry Hardman." She lost her grip, sucked into the spinning vortex like a spider up a vacuum cleaner. "No!" Harry roared, the wind wrapping itself around him like a fist. The Tommyknocker stared at him, grinning insanely.
"Those heartbeats pass fast, Harry. You'd better hurry. The lives of those who hunt you, or the lives of those you love. Your choice."
There was no choice to make. Harry turned, fighting the wind, fighting the current, swimming through the air until he reached the wall. He hauled himself back into the hole, Darlene's words churning inside his head. "Yours is the kind of courage that lasts 1,000 years." He only hoped she was right. The next chapter, what wouldn't Dad do? The tunnel was so small it was like a coffin, the rock grazing Harry's knees, pinching his wings as he tried to squeeze through. Excuse me. The wind ripped past his ears, pulled into the Tommyknocker's cave, and it carried the song of Halloween with it. It sounded like feeding time at the zoo out there, or a riot, or some kind of zombie massacre, or maybe all three at the same time. Harry paused to catch his breath. It was dark in here, and part of him wondered if he should just stay where he was and close his eyes. Maybe he would fall asleep and wake up to find this was all some horrific dream, or maybe he'd wake up and somebody else would have taken care of it. Maybe he just wouldn't wake up at all. Then he thought of Arlene, smiling at him every day when he got home from school, warming his heart even on the coldest days. He thought of his mum, Darlene, Buster, Dizzy, the way they'd all carried him through the bad times. And he thought of his dad too, a dad who he maybe hadn't known as well as he'd have liked, or as well as he'd wanted to, but whose smile still beamed out at him from the cold, dark tunnel. Be brave, Harry. Always. He set off again, twisting his body around the last corner of the tunnel. Through the hole he could see a chaos of movement in the cave ahead. Things ran, growling and snarling past the entrance to the tunnel. Dark shapes flapped through the sky. Balls of fire flared, making the rock tremble as they laid siege to the wall. Now that he was closer, he could make out the sound of his own name, cried and screeched and howled again and again and again. He didn't understand it. He didn't understand how it could be real, but it was, and there was no one else who could stop it. Somehow he had to go into that cave and defeat every last creature in mortal combat. He had to fight the whole of Halloween and win, and only then would the Tommyknocker release his sisters and his best friend and his dog. You can do this, he told himself. He thought of Dad. How many times had he heard stories of Harry Hardman sorting problems with his fists and roughing up bad guys and stopping bar brawls? His dad had never been afraid to get into a fight, but the honest truth was that Harry had never been in one, unless you counted all the times his sisters had beaten him up. He bunched his fists. He wasn't even sure he knew how to throw a punch. But he had to try. So he kept crawling until the end of the tunnel was close enough to touch. It seemed like the wolves had given up on getting through this way, but he could hear them clawing at the walls, and he knew they'd be on him as soon as he poked his head into the cave. He had to be quick, but when he went to push himself out of the tunnel, his body froze, terror short-circuiting his brain. "Oh, come on, Harry," he said. He tried again, kicking his feet against the walls, driving himself out of the hole, only to feel his pants snag on the rock. A wolf. Trousers. I wrote it American style. For anyone who's thinking, what is pants? No, I meant his trousers. Only to feel his trousers snag on the rock. A wolf howled, and Harry twisted his head to see it just feet away. It bounded at him, teeth bared, and Harry thrashed, bucked, writhed until suddenly he was loose. He grabbed the edge of the hole and wrenched himself out, firing up his wings. He jumped, rising impossibly slowly, with the wolf lunging for his boot and sinking its fangs into it. Harry screamed, trying to tug it free. More wolves were pounding across the rock, leaping for him. He strained, the whine of his wings almost too high-pitched to hear. With a sucking sound, his foot came out of the shoe and he rolled back in a clumsy somersault. One of the wolves jumped, its jaws snapping shut inches from his face. He lashed out at it, but it was still rising, turning, the cavern spinning in wild circles. There had to be 100 creatures here, maybe more. The cave flooded with fangs and claws and glowing, fury-filled eyes. How was he supposed to fight them? He didn't even have his wand. There were rocks scattered around that he could throw, pieces of wood from the scaffold, not to mention the cannons. The cannons. He wiggled his arms, and spun lazily, seeing that the pirates had beaten him to it. There was an almighty blast from the far side of the cave, and a cannonball burned past his head. It hit the rock, ricocheting into a group of Frankensteins and knocking them over like bowling pins. Another fired, then a third, the cave filling with smoke. Harry's back was screaming, his wings losing strength. Beneath him was an ocean of rage, ready to swallow him whole when he fell. It was useless. He was Harry Hardman. He couldn't fight one of them, let alone all of them. "You're not Dad." He definitely wasn't his dad. But maybe he didn't have to be his dad. He steadied himself with his arms, hovering 20 feet above the cave floor. Another cannon exploded, the shot thudding into the wall and releasing a plume of dust. The pirates were loading their pistols, and down below a witch was brewing up a fireball between her fingers. A witch? "Charlene!" he called out. "Just wait, please!" He had to fight them, he knew, but he didn't have to do it the way Dad would have done. He dug back inside his memories. He dug deep, seeing something he hadn't thought about in years. "Charlene! Do you remember the day after Dad's funeral?" he shouted to her, barely able to hear himself over the thunderous roars. "I was so upset I couldn't stop crying. You built a den in the living room and we camped there for the night. You tucked me in. You read to me." It was hard to picture Charlene ever being that kind, but the story was true. They'd kept the den there for a month, the four of them hiding out in it while Mum prepared to give birth to Arlene. Below, Charlene hesitated, looking up at Harry past her long, crooked nose. "You never left me," he said. "Not once. You never let me be on my own. And Marlene..." He couldn't see Marlene, but she had to be here somewhere. "You remember you bought me my first proper Halloween costume when I was 7? A werewolf. You saved up to get it for me from the money you made on the papers. And I loved it so much I didn't take it off for a fortnight. You told me I smelled like a wolf after that." He glanced down at the wolves. No offence." His back was cramping now from the effort of flying. He was losing altitude. The wolves worked into a frenzy as they waited for him to fall. "Mike!" he yelled down, spotting him there. "Mike, do you remember Miss Packer back in kindergarten? She was way harsh and she took my lunch because Mum had given me chips and Coke instead of fruit or whatever. You split your sub with me and we mushed your banana into her coat pocket when she was out in the yard." He would have smiled at the memory if the pain of flying hadn't been so bad. He hoiked himself up, grunting out his words. "We used to be friends back then, Mike," he said. "Me, you and Buster too. We weren't always enemies. Dude, even Jonah hung out with us back then. He stole that box of records from Duke Henry's mum, do you remember? And we had a party in your old garage. It wasn't always like this." It was no good. The pirates were chanting as they aimed their guns. A bunch of Roman soldiers were loading what looked like a ballista. There was a formation of witches riding their broomsticks towards him, and the wolves were still running back and forth, foam spraying from their jaws. Except for Mike, that was. He sat on his haunches, his head tilted up, watching Harry intensely. "We weren't always monsters," Harry said. "You used to be kind. You all did. Charlene, you were the best big sister I could have ever asked for." Charlene's fireball had dwindled away and she was watching him too. She frowned, then looked around as if only just noticing where she was. Marlene walked into view beside her, pulling her veil aside. He saw her mouth shape his name, like it was the first time she'd spoken it. He thought of the list, imagined Buster right next to him. "Rule number 17. Inside every good guy is a monster waiting to tear loose, and inside every monster there's a good guy trying to get out." "You're all good people," Harry said again. "Kind people. None of you are monsters." He pointed to the tunnel he'd just crawled through. "There's only one monster here, and it's through there. It's the thing that cursed you, and unless we beat it, you're never going to be able to change back. You're going to be monsters forever, all of you." 2 more of the wolves had quietened, and some of the pirates had lowered their guns. The noise in the cavern had dropped enough that the buzz of Harry's wings was the loudest sound here. He made one final effort to keep himself airborne. "I can't fight it, not by myself," he said. "But we can do it together. I know we can. It turned us into monsters to lure us here. It wants to, eat us or something." He left out the part about his wish. He was pretty sure nobody needed to hear that. "But it made a mistake. It turned us into an army of creatures that can kick its ass." He was falling now, his wings making a noise like a stalling plane engine. "You're still you," he said. "You're still inside you. You're still you inside even. It can't take that away." He landed on his backside, the impact travelling up his spine and punching the air from his lungs. The monsters were on him in a heartbeat, the wolves howling as they moved in for the kill. The closest one opened its mouth, lunged at Harry. It was Jonah Carey, he knew. Jonah Carey was going to chew him to pieces. But another wolf slammed into Jonah, biting his neck, driving him back. Jonah dropped onto his side, whimpering, and Wolf Mike turned to Harry. He was almost completely lost now, but there was still something left of him in those yellow eyes. He growled at the other wolves. Then Charlene was there, pushing through the crowd until she was standing over Harry. "Nobody picks on my little brother," she said, offering him a green-skinned hand. "Except for me. Right, Dork?" He took her hand, letting her pull him up. Everyone in the cave was staring at him now, row after row of monsters craning over each other's shoulders for a better view. It would have been utterly silent if not for the thunder of the storm in the cave next door. Until one of the cannons suddenly blasted, the cannonball whistling overhead. Everyone ducked. "Oh, Sorry, shouted one of the pirates from the back of the cave. I didn't realise we'd stopped fighting. You brought me back, said Marlene as she pushed past the wolves, standing next to Charlene. I thought I was lost in there, in my own head. She hugged him. Come on, we need to get out of here. No, said Harry. It took Arlene, and Darlene too. Oh no, said Marlene. And Dizzy and Buster. Marlene shrugged. We have to fight it, Harry said. All of us. Who's with me? I am, said Charlene. Look what that butthead has done to my hair. And me, said Marlene, her eyes glowing. Nobody messes with the Hardmans. Wolf Mike lifted his head and barked twice. Across the cavern rose a wave of replies. I will. Let's get going. Let's go get him. I don't know what's happening. Lead the way, little brother, said Charlene, powering up her fists. Let's do this. Rule 19, Harry whispered, so low that only he could hear. If you're going to fight evil, make sure you're not alone. The Tommyknocker wanted a fight, and Harry was happy to give it one. He grinned at his sisters, then he turned and ran for the tunnel, ready to face pure evil once again. The only difference was that this time he had an army at his back. Next chapter is called Endgame. There was no need to worry about climbing back through the tunnel. Before Harry could get near it, the cannons roared again, shots thumping into the crumbling wall. Charlene was chanting a spell, another ball of light forming between her gnarled fingers. 24 other witches were doing the same thing, pulses of light zipping between them and making Harry's ears ache like he was underwater. As one, they thrust out their arms and a wave of energy crashed across the cave. Harry dived out of the way, watching as it hit the wall like a giant fist. The rock didn't stand a chance, the middle exploding into dust and the rest collapsing into a heap. Charge! Harry shouted, clambering over the rubble. He still had no idea what he was doing, and even less idea if it would work. But the moment he crested the hill of rock, and saw into the next cave, he knew he'd made the right choice. The Tommyknocker stood there, bathed in light and cloaked in fog. Its mouth dropped open in shock as the wolves bounded into the cave, Mike at the head of the pack. The witches flew in next, perched expertly on their broomsticks, fireballs sitting in their hands ready to be pitched. A robot with rocket boots roared into the middle of the room, its single eye glowing. Then came the vampires, almost invisible as they fluttered like bats before materialising on the other side of the Tommyknocker. Harry kept running, stumbling on the uneven ground, his shoeless foot aching. Practically everything here was faster than him, a platoon of monsters overtaking him and crowding around the creature in the middle of the cave. Even the dinosaur was there, caught up in the stampede.
What is this?
The Tommyknocker boomed. Overhead the storm still raged, those thick clouds of fog churning in relentless circles. Harry couldn't see Buster and the others anywhere inside it. Oh, please don't be too late.
Harry Hardman, the Tommyknocker said, you are a fool and a coward, and now everyone will die.
Not today, buttwipe, screeched Charlene, launching her fireball. She'd always been a great shot, and this was no different. It thwacked the Tommyknocker in the face, sending it stumbling backwards.
How dare you, it coughed. I am the mighty.
Another fireball thumped into it, plus a laser beam from the robot, a lightning strike from Marlene, 12 arrows, a boulder, and what looked like a bunch of bananas from somebody who dressed up as a bowl of fruit. The creature tumbled to the ground, howling with rage, and then the wolves were all on it. All of them. They tore at its limbs, its throat, snarling, ripping.
Yow! Get them off me!
Harry kept running, limping into the melee. He was almost there when the first wolf flew into the air, another following almost instantly. The Tommyknocker was fighting back, struggling to get to its feet. It threw out its hands and sent the last of the wolves tumbling away, and then it was up, and it looked furious.
No more, it
bellowed, loud enough to make the cave tremble.
How dare you? I am ancient. I am the heart of the mountain. I am...
Ah! The Tommyknocker shrieked. The T-Rex had crunched its jaws around its head, lifting it into the air and shaking it like a dog with a toy.
Let me out!
The Tommyknocker gargled.
This is disgusting!
Something flew past Harry, hard enough to shake the air. A girl in a superhero costume. Harry could have sworn it was Stacey Cacker. She plucked the Tommyknocker from the dinosaur's mouth and threw it into the wall. And again, moving so fast she was just a blur. It tried to fight back, but the wolves had regrouped, filled with a savage rage as they tore into it again. Harry stopped for breath. The cave was a lot bigger than he'd remembered it being. He sucked in air and was about to start running again when he spotted something on the ground, wedged between two rocks. It was his wand, bent and broken and buckled, but still his. The Tommyknocker was growing weaker, its body glitching again as it tried to stumble away. It only made it a few feet before a humongous sumo wrestler wobbled into it, belly flopping it across the cave. It was caught by a couple of Brett the Hitman Harts, who double suplexed it back into the ground.
"You are all doomed," the creature said. "There is no escape for you."
Out of nowhere, a tiger roared into it, pinning the creature beneath its massive paws and baring its teeth. One of the cowboys was wrapping a lasso around the Tommyknocker's ankles, and a cop snapped her handcuffs around its wrists.
"You don't know what you've done, Harry,"
it said, and its voice no longer carried any power. It was the voice of an old man with a lilting, old-fashioned accent, and now that the creature wasn't glowing so much, Harry could see that it was an old man, short, shrunk, shriveled, and impossibly thin. Harry flexed his wings, buzzing into the air and pointing his wand at the Tommyknocker. "I know exactly what I've done," he said. "I've beaten you. Now give me back my sisters, my friend, and my dog." The Tommyknocker licked its lips, its eyes darting from one supernatural creature to the next. It knew it had been beaten, though. Harry could see it in the way it drew its knees up to its chest, in the way its bottom lip quivered.
"No,"
it said.
"I won't."
Magic wand, make it quick, power up and fry this Okay, the creature whined, slamming its fists on the rock. "Okay, you win." It lifted its hands, and every monster in the cavern leant in, weapons charged, claws bared, glaring. The Tommyknocker stared at Harry, livid. "If I do this, you let me go. Deal?" "Deal," said Harry, ignoring the protests from the crowd. "Give them back, and you're free to go." The Tommyknocker tutted, then spoke some words beneath its breath. Overhead, the storm clouds parted, and with a chorus of wails, 3 people and a dog dropped from the fog. They were snatched from the air by 2 superheroes and a giant pigeon, all except for Buster, who hit the ground with a splat. "I'm okay," he groaned. "I'm okay." "Harry!" cried Arlene. He landed next to her, and she threw herself into him, hugging him so tightly he heard his spine pop. "I was so scared." Dizzy ran to Harry's side, barking at the Tommyknocker. The creature had been released, and it was backing away, stumbling on the rock. It looked weak, it looked beaten, but that same malicious smile still sat on its withered face. "Rule 18, said Buster as he hopped to Harry's side, held up by a living snowman. "The bad guy is never beaten first time around." "You fool," the Tommyknocker said, weaving its hands in strange patterns. The storm overhead was growing again, fingers of fog brushing against the townsfolk. Harry saw the way their eyes glazed over, the way they started to lose themselves to their costumes again. The fog was the thing that carried the Tommyknocker's magic, and Harry would not let it happen again. "No," he said, thrusting out the wand. "Not this time." It was broken beyond repair. The plastic cracked in 6 places, the star completely gone. But it still worked. It had to. "Magic wand, victory is ours," said Harry. "Strip this butthead of its powers." The wand burped, twitched, then spat a bolt of crackling blue energy right at the Tommyknocker. It tried to dodge it, but the charge cracked into its chest like a wrecking ball, sending it rolling back across the cavern. "No!" The wand started to break apart in Harry's hand, turning to dust, but it had done its job. The Tommyknocker was writhing on the ground, clutching at its chest and gasping for air. Overhead, the storm was ebbing, vanishing like a morning mist on a hot day. "It can't be," the Tommyknocker said. "This can't happen. It's my magic, you hear me? Not yours." "Whoa!" came a cry from across the room. The T-Rex was dancing back and forth in a panic, its head shrinking and its arms growing. With a loud pop, the dinosaur's ferocious face morphed into that of Josh Brightman. He deflated like a balloon until he was standing there in his sagging rubber costume. "I'm back!" "No!" the Tommyknocker wailed. Everybody was changing. Teeth retracting, extra limbs vanishing, scales and fur shimmering back into leather and wool. The sound of it, of 100 pops echoing across the cavern, was enough to make Harry cup his hands to his ears. He felt it too, a subtle pressure in his back, a furious itching sensation on his face. His body snapped upright with a sound like a gunshot, and suddenly he was himself again. He reached for his wings, finding only shoulders, and when he ran his fingers down his cheeks, they were smooth and squidgy and whisker-free. The Tommyknocker was back on its feet, scampering away. It too looked like it was changing, its whole body shrinking into itself until it was the size of a doll. It stopped for long enough to shake a fist, jumping up and down with rage. "You'll pay for this," it squeaked. "It will take me centuries to get my power back, but just you wait. My power's back even. Just you wait." It leapt into a hole in the rock, squirming away, leaving 100 shocked townsfolk dressed for Halloween, and one trembling, grinning Harry Hardman. And the last chapter is called Happy Halloween. What happened next was a blur. Harry was so exhausted he could barely stand, but just as he was about to collapse, somebody grabbed hold of him, slinging his arm around their shoulders. When Harry looked, he was surprised to see Mike Carey there. He still had a bloom of white fur on his nose that was quickly dissolving. "Mike?" he said. "Yeah," Mike replied, "but only thanks to you. For a while there I thought I was going to be Wolfie McFuzzypants forever." "Harry!" yelled Darlene, running up to him. She was completely human again, apart from the fact that 8 eyes blinked down at him. She shook her head, and they popped like bubbles, leaving only 2 filled with tears. She threw her arms around him for a full 5 seconds. "You did it!" "We did it," said Harry when he could breathe again. He looked past Darlene to see Buster pushing through the crowds. His leg had grown back, his hands too. As he reached Harry, 2 lumps began to sprout on the side of his head, unfurling into ears. He checked them, patting his legs, his arms, then peering down his pants, blowing a sigh of pure relief. "Whew. Oh, you think that ass biscuit has gone?" he asked, trying to pull the bubble wrap off his face. Harry nodded. He couldn't be sure, of course, but there was none of the storm left overhead, no fog curling around their ankles, no electric hum of power in the air. What had the Tommyknocker said? That it would take hundreds of years for it to get its powers back. "It's gone," he said. "We're safe." "Hey, Dork!" came a voice behind him. It was Charlene, Marlene beside her. Both of them still dressed in their costumes, but undeniably human. "Oh, sorry, Charlene," Harry said. "I thought everyone had changed back. I guess it missed you out since your face is still all, gross." She grabbed him in a headlock and nuggied him hard, but when she let go, she was smiling. The same smile he remembered from all those years ago. "Very funny," she said, looking at his head. "But I think it actually did miss you out. Part of you, anyway." Harry's heart thumped in his chest as he felt the top of his head and the hair that was still hanging down to his shoulders. "What?" he yelped. Charlene opened her compact mirror and held it up. Not only was his hair still long, he saw, it was still rainbow-coloured. He swished his head from side to side and it fanned out, shimmering. "How?" he asked. "That doesn't make any sense." "I'll cut it for you when we get home," said Darlene. "I like it," said Arlene. Harry looked at his reflection. It did look pretty awesome. "You know what?" he said. "I kind of like it too." "Harry!" The voice was unmistakable, and hearing it made his chest swell, his ears ring. He peered past a handful of librarians dressed as wizards to see his mum running across the cave, her face made up like a tiger's. "Mum!" he called out, grunting as she smacked into him. She sobbed into his neck, smearing him with orange and white and black paint. "Oh, my baby," she said, "my poor baby." "Awkward," muttered Buster, but Harry didn't care, holding his mum until she peeled herself free. She picked up Arlene, holding her on her hip as Darlene, then Marlene, and finally Charlene hugged her tight. "What happened?" she said. "I don't remember anything, but I think I was a..." She gagged, belching out a long, bushy strip of fur that might have been a tail. "Oh, God, did I eat a raccoon?" The look of horror on her face almost made Harry laugh. "It doesn't matter," said Harry. "You're you again now." "It kind of matters," said Mum. "So," asked Mike, "what now?" Harry wasn't sure. Everyone seemed to be back to normal, shuffling around the cave and talking in weary but excited voices. The football team huddled by one wall, even Jonah Carey looking rattled inside his wolf costume. The police in their pirate outfits were assembling by the mound of fallen rock, looking pretty sheepish. It was going to take the town a long time to get over this. Years, maybe decades. How many buildings had been destroyed? And what if people had died? Harry shook his head. Surely it hadn't gone that far. Buster had lost half his limbs and recovered completely. Even so, his stomach shriveled at the thought that somebody could have been seriously hurt by his stupid wish. "Okay, listen up," yelled one of the cops. It was the chief of police, Harry saw, the man who'd been dressed like the pirate captain. "I honestly have no idea what the heck is going on, but right now we've got one priority, getting you all out of this mine." A small cheer rippled through the crowd. "We're going to do this together, and slowly. If you need help, just ask. Nobody gets left behind, okay?" He started to walk, everyone flowing slowly to the demolished end of the cavern. Those who passed Harry gave him gentle claps on the shoulder and smiled and offered their thanks. Not that he felt he deserved it, seeing how this was all his fault in the first place. He smiled back, limping after them, relying on Mike to hold him up until suddenly Big Scott Atkins, a linebacker, was there, lifting Harry onto his shoulder. Somebody else rushed to help. Then another member of the football team, carrying Harry like he was royalty. Buster trotted alongside, smiling up at him. "Happy Halloween, Harry," he shouted. "Happy Halloween," Harry grinned back. And riding a sea of people through the mines, laughing at the sheer joy of it, he realised that it really was. By the time a police cruiser dropped them back at home, it was nearly 3 a.m, and nobody seemed to have the strength to climb out. Eventually, Harry popped his door and stepped into the cold, helping his mum out of the front, while his sisters and Dizzy and Buster unpacked themselves from the back. Buster's mum had been found roaming in the woods, chasing mice, but she was in no state of mind to look after her son, so Harry's mum had offered him the couch. It was only when they looked up at the house, though, that Harry remembered the couch was about the only thing still standing. The entire top floor had been reduced to rubble, all the windows shattered and half of the roof torn away. "Oh, yeah," said Harry. "I forgot about that." His mum stood there, her mouth flapping like the splintered front door that's hung loose on its hinges. "Sorry," he said. Technically it wasn't me, it was a giant gorilla." "Oh, it doesn't matter," his mum said, sighing. "It's only stuff. We'll stay at your great aunt's until we can get it sorted. Can you give us a ride?" The cop nodded, stifling a yawn. "I'll just grab us some stuff," she said. "Wait here." Nobody did as she asked. Charlene and Marlene huffing as they followed her in, Darlene and Buster and Arlene and Dizzy trailing after Harry as he pushed through the gate into the backyard. "Where are you going?" Arlene asked. "There's just something I need to do," he replied, heading past Dizzy's pen to the shed. It was as black as a mine in there, but the smell of it was instantly comforting, that coal and bubble bath scent of his dad. Harry flicked on the bulb, swaying with exhaustion. "He'd be proud," Darlene said, sliding her arm through his, keeping him steady. "He'd be the proudest man on the planet." "You think?" Harry said, wondering how she'd read his mind. "I know," she replied. "Come on, say your piece and let's get out of here." He walked to the shelves, running his hands along the spines of the VHS tapes. "Be brave," they spelt. "Be brave, Harry, always." And he thought about his dad, running back into the collapsing shaft to pull another miner to safety. He wasn't sure if he could ever be that brave, but then what he'd done tonight wasn't a million miles away from that, was it? He'd thrown himself towards danger to help the town. He'd put his life on the line to save his friends. He'd taken on the full power of Halloween. And he'd won. Maybe some of his dad's courage had made it into him after all. "Thank you, Dad," he said. "I love you so much." He walked out of the shed, everybody following. Buster pulled the door shut behind them, calling after Harry as they crossed the yard. "Dude, you know we've got Rule 6 still to worry about tonight, right?" "Rule 6? asked Arlene, shivering. "What's that?" "Things are always worse in the sequel," said Harry through a smile. Whatever life threw at him next, whatever change came his way, he could deal with it. After all, he was Harry Hardman, fairy princess, and even without the whiskers and the wings and the wand, he was pretty cool. "Let's worry about that tomorrow, yeah?" "Yeah," said Buster, yawning so hard his jaw popped. "I need sleep. Today's been a total nightmare beast." Harry stopped, tilting his head, deep in thought. Darlene and Arlene and Buster looked back at him, their expressions of worry glowing in the moonlight. "What?" said Darlene. "What's wrong?" "Total nightmare, Beast." Harry shook the hair out of his eyes, laughing. "You know, that gives me a great idea for next Halloween." And there we go. Harry Hardman versus Halloween is still one of my favourite books that I've ever written, because it is just like I say, it's a love story for Halloween, which I do genuinely love. I hope you really enjoyed that. I know there's been a massive break in the middle, but I'm sure some of you will have come to this story a bit later and read it all in one go. But I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully it'll be out at some point. And yeah, it is a personal story for me as well, because when we were doing our family tree, we realised that a lot of my ancestors were coal miners, so this is really in a way dedicated to them. Which is a nice thing to do. So I will hurry up and post this online now, and you can have a listen. Let me know what you think. I'll be back at some point, probably reading. Oh, they're up there. I can't reach them from here. Probably reading The Devil's Engine over the summer holidays, and yeah, that'll be something to look forward to. We'll start with Hellraisers, probably tomorrow at some point. So yeah, Harry Hardman versus Halloween. Do let me know what you think of it in the comments, and yeah, I'll see you really soon. I hope you're enjoying your summer, and yeah, take care of yourselves.